Okay, welcome everybody. We are, it's Tiffany from Investor Life. As you may or may not know, we help people grow their portfolios from 2 or 3 properties up to 15, 20, 25, whatever it might be. Help people and investors scale. We have today Bill Binko from the Educated Landlord. Joining us today. Bill has got tons of experience. He's helped lots of other landlords and investors through some of the nuances of being a landlord. So we're going to talk to Bill today, pick his brain a little bit, get as much insight as we can from his years of experience, both in his own portfolio and in helping others. So welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited to get to talk to everybody today.
Right? Awesome. Okay, so tell us a little bit. First, let's hear your backstory. Like, who are you and why do you have the ability to stand here today and be our expert?
Well, let's go way back to 2003 when we were expecting our second child, and we were kind of wondering, should we continue doing what we're doing, which was just working day jobs and carrying on, or what can we do to create a little bit of freedom in our life? And we're like so many people, we started with the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book, and it kind of starts a fire, and what do you do next? And my wife kind of stumbled onto some real estate type stuff. She attended a free RAIN meeting.
Yeah.
And there happened to be a deal on with a Ron LeGrand course up in Edmonton. So Edmonton, Alberta. So she pretty well immediately signed us up at that point. She's in the room over here. I keep looking over. So she immediately signed us up for this rather expensive course at the time. Ended up going up to Edmonton in June 2003. Took this course, and it was probably a month and a half, we had our first property that we bought. And within slightly over that, we learned that a lot of the stuff we learned was based out of the U.S. and didn't apply in Alberta.
Right. Right.
Reality check, yeah. So unfortunately, we bumped into the right people, knew some of the right people from the meeting that directed us to lawyers who could help us out, and we kind of modified some of the information. So we bought that first property a month and a half. Suddenly, another month and a half later, we picked up another 4 properties. So we had 5 properties in really quick time frame.
Yeah.
And we originally started as flippers, but we couldn't flip some of these as quickly as we hoped, and we became accidental landlords.
Right, like so many of us do, yes.
Yes, exactly. And as we became landlords, we're going, I think there's something here. This is going to create a longer term wealth than some of this flip stuff that we're working on. Yeah. So we started renting out some of the properties, started learning some of the nuances, as you mentioned earlier, and just kind of took off. So we kind of built a model where we would flip 2 or 3 properties, buy another rental property, flip another 2 or 3 properties, buy another rental property or 2, start bringing in joint venture partners, buy another rental property, and it really exploded. We ended up buying, it was around 50 properties in about 4 years, and just went crazy, had fun. But along the way, we also picked up some rooming houses.
Oh.
And saw some huge cash flow in rooming houses. And at our peak, we had 53 rooms that I rented on a weekly basis. So over my time frame with these furnished rentals, I'm well over 1,500 tenants now. And we did sell our last rooming house a little over a year ago. It does wear on you after a while. You referenced this yesterday in the initial session where we tried to get set up about how you kind of got, I'm going to paraphrase, you kind of got soured on tenants.
Yeah, but there I did, yeah.
When you deal with enough tenants, some bad ones, some good ones, it's kind of a numbers game. You kind of get soured on tenants. And we specifically me, had reached that point where it's like, I just got to back away from a lot of that. So we sold off all the rooming houses over a few years. But the benefit of having done all this is you learn a ton about the entire landlord process.
Absolutely.
So whether it's the eviction process, as far back as 2007, 2008, landlords started to realize I have a little bit of experience in the area and started to ask me questions, and I realized there was a big gap there. So I created some information, put together a website, albertaeviction.com, where I was teaching landlords the eviction process, how it worked in Alberta. The RTDRS was just introduced, so I put together a package walking through the whole residential tenancy dispute resolution service in Alberta, and took off pretty well. I think I've sold about 400, 500 copies of it now.
Nice.
So helped a lot of landlords through that process, and then also did some consulting to walk them through the steps. But as I was doing that, I learned there was so many gaps in knowledge. Landlords just had no clue. They became accidental landlords and they had no idea where to find resources. They saw something on HGTV that walked them through how great real estate was, and they bought a property without knowing any of the cash flow rules or what's a good property, what's a bad property. So that led me to the Educated Landlord, and I started creating content there, which just basically gave, we'll call it generic information, but generic information that would help landlords. So, here's how you calculate cash flow. Here's what real cash flow is. You got to worry about maintenance and vacancies. It's not just your mortgage, your tax, your insurance. Paint everything in a single color. If you've got multiple properties, use a master key system. Here's why it works. Here's how it works. All kinds of information like that. And it took off fairly well. So now I have people from all over North America, Africa, Middle East, Europe that are subscribers and getting information. And again, it's not specific legal information because it varies so much from place to place, but it covers how to get information and just walks people through the process, which brings me to where I am now. I end up talking to a lot of people through webinars and different programs. So I've done webinars for American Apartment Owners Association and articles published in California Apartment Owners Association, various other places throughout the US. And
nice. That's awesome. So
I talk a lot.
Perfect. So the thing is, like, there's like you said, there's legislation, there's all this specific stuff. If we wanted that, we would go to your Alberta Eviction Services website. But if we want more general landlord stuff, the little stuff that you learn, like what you're talking about, master keying stuff, or before when I've talked to you, you said it like about getting a standardization for your paint colors and that sort of thing. Things so that you don't have to think about these little things. Now that is all the educatedlandlord.com site, right? So that's more standard, generic stuff. Now, when we talk about how are we dealing with our tenants right now, with COVID as being unprecedented, this situation, none of us really knows how to deal with it. There's, as we've talked about before, there's laws, there's legislation, there's things that we can do. Okay, you can do this, you can't do that, but what about the nuances? What about those relationships that we have or don't have with our tenants? How do we improve them? What's fair, what's not fair? That's the kind of stuff that only comes with experience, right? Like you can only speak to it if you've been there a little bit.
Well, what landlords forget is we are nothing without our tenants. I mean, we think the property's where we make all the money, but it's the tenants. There's so much weight on having good tenants, and 100%. When you start thinking of them as disposable and you'll just get another one, you get into that downhill slide when you start realizing they're important assets and you start taking care of them. And referring back to last night, you said, you don't necessarily want to be friends with them, but you want to be friends with them. You got to find that fine line. And, they're not necessarily going to come into your life, but they're part of your life because they're part of where you're going. So you need to be a human. You need to work with them. And I was, I've done a few webinars earlier already talking about some of the COVID issues and how we got to deal with the tenants. And I was saying, 3 or 4 weeks ago, you got to get in front of this. You got to reach out to all of your tenants, whether it's texting them, whether it's calling them, whether it's emailing, whatever preferred method you have to interact with your tenants and they interact with you. You needed to get in front of that and say, hey, I understand things are crazy. What's going on with you? Are you okay? Do you need help? Of all these resources, you guys have been able to provide a ton of resources, and I've been sharing that with some of my groups. And it's like, this is where you go for this. This is where you go for this. If you need some of the information, let me know. If you're having problems, talk with me. I want to work with you. I put the time and effort to get good people in, and I want to keep you people happy and good. Yeah. So my initial thoughts were, as we're going through this, we're going to see some tenants leave because they're not able to pay. How hard is it going to be to get new tenants? And you're going to have to go through this massive screening process because there's going to be a lot of, let's call them poor tenants out there who've been evicted for various reasons. Maybe it's rent strikes, maybe it's other challenges. And if you've got the good people now, stick with them and work with them and find out what you can do. 100%. And on the back end of that, we've got options for deferrals. I'm not doing any deferrals on any of my rentals right now. I'm kind of saving that in the back end. I've talked to other landlords and seen other reports from other landlords where they're deferring everything so they can build up a war chest. If you have access to lines of credit, you've got more war chest and reserves. This is where we're going to separate a lot of good landlords from wannabe landlords who never set money aside. So if they haven't been setting money aside, which they should have done as a good practice before, it's really going to bite them now when they've got to cut back at these times. But ultimately, if you can get things like deferrals and you can get some of your costs cut back, why aren't we passing that on to the tenants and go, hey, if things are tough, pay a little bit less right now and we'll work something out. Get it on paper. You guys have got forms and paperwork from Barry to help people walk through the process. But
yeah, so let's talk about that for a second. So when again, I guess just to be really clear, we're not talking about rent forgiveness, because we as investors are not getting mortgage forgiveness. We are getting mortgage deferrals, meaning we're getting a little bit of a break now, but that money will have to be paid. Therefore, our tenants too. However, just like we appreciate the government, what they're doing, and the mortgage companies, what they're offering us, good humans would pass that on if we can. So now, documentation wise, so we do have, just for everyone's information, Barry McGuire, he's a lawyer in Alberta, creative real estate lawyer, just been amazing for us all over the years. And he provided a document. So it's a payment plan document, it's everyone's signing and initialing in the right spots, and you're clearly laying out your payment plan. So how important is that? And what about other documentation? What do you think we need in order to kind of prove to legislative bodies or whatever it might be that we did our best as landlords? What do you figure there?
So a few different areas to cover here. So this is a really fluid area at the moment because the rules are changing every day.
Right.
So with some of these deferrals, a lot of people didn't realize you would end up actually paying more because you're going to be paying interest on interest. Some of the banks have started to step up and saying, hey, we're going to even defer the interest now. Will that change as we move along? Will they all do it? Will they take advantage of the situation? We don't know. This is going to be amortized over the term potentially, which means if you only have a year or two left, maybe your payments are going to go up $100 or $150 a month to amortize the rest of that once you start paying again. Will it cause issues when you renew the mortgage, because now you're going to have to renew for more than the mortgage? So it's all fluid. It's all going to change. So deferrals should almost be, you really got to look into deferrals before you just defer it, and you got to be ready in case there's a few hiccups along the way.
And so, each bank is different too, right? What they're
exactly.
doing.
And each bank is different every week. Right. So they're changing the rules. So just be prepared. So as far as documentation, one of the things I talk about is creating tenant journals. And it may not necessarily be a single journal or book for each tenant. Maybe you've got one book that covers all of your tenants and you have sections in there. If you're trying to interact with your tenants, a lot of the mandates from the government offices, and this is not just Alberta, this seems to be everywhere, they're putting a lot of onus on the landlords to say, work with your tenants, come up with a plan, and do the right thing. Well, what is that right thing? Is it reduced rent? Is it a payment plan? Is it free rent for a couple months? They don't go into specifics. They just say, work with your tenant. So as a landlord, you got to understand you still have costs. I mean, you're still going to have to pay taxes. It may be deferred, but you're still going to have to pay it. You're going to have insurance costs. Insurance is not going to go away. They're not going to defer insurance at this point. So you've got some dedicated costs that you've got to worry about. So you might want to work on that, figure out what you're going to need for minimums to make this work. Think about the long term, if you're not going to be able to defer this stuff, and start working from there and go backwards. A lot of tenants are actually doing better now than they were before. Maybe I shouldn't say a lot, but we're seeing that section where there's a bunch of people who are working more hours than ever now because they're filling these gaps, whether they're in some of the grocery store business or the healthcare business. A lot of them are going crazy. On the other end, there's a lot of healthcare and other people who are retail people who are not working at all. So, some are not going to have an issue with this. Some are going to have more money than they were before, and you've got to see what fits. You may have half a dozen tenants that are ahead, and you may have 30 tenants that are behind. So be prepared, know what your minimum costs are, and start documenting all these interactions with the tenants.
So you would document literally, like I sent a text this day, this is what I said, this was the response or no response kind of thing?
Exactly. And, especially verbal conversations. If you're having a phone call with the tenant going, hey, how you doing? What's happening? In your little journal, you've got this is the day I called, this is, when we talked, and followed up with a text or an email. It's like, my email says, hey, Sally, I'm glad to hear that you're doing okay. I understand you're having a few challenges. we'll get back together and we'll work out a plan so we can get you some reduced numbers here to make this work for all of us.
Yeah.
So now you've got a paper trail. Now you've got a little bit of information stacking on top of itself saying, I talked, follow-up email, the response, and you compile this information. And back to a lot of my experience with the evictions, the majority of the time you never ever need the information. You may never need to have all of that paperwork, all that paper trail you've created, but that one time you need it, you're just so glad you've got that paper trail because it makes it all work.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to
lose.
Yeah, most of the provinces, a lot of the places in the U.S., they're disallowing evictions right now. And Alberta specifically, you're not allowed to evict anybody this month. My feelings and my thoughts are that's probably going to get extended for another month or two or even potentially longer. So where does that leave you if you've got a problem tenant? Well, the specific legislation doesn't say you're not allowed to evict. You just have to follow different processes. You have to make sure you try and work out a payment plan. So you need to create that paper trail to show that you tried to work with the tenant and how the response was, whether they were working with you or not. And you just want to have it all documented and all prepared so that you can stack this paperwork and go, here's what I did, here's what I tried, here's the response or the lack of response. And I've made multiple efforts. So that will give you that framework so that if you do have to get to the point to get a tenant out, you've got a base to do it. And I don't think it's going to be, it's something we fear, much like those toilets that you get the phone calls at 2:00 in the morning because the toilet's plugged. I've never had one.
Yeah.
1,500 tenants plus. I've never had one of those calls, but that's the first thing you see on landlord forums about, wow, I'll never be a landlord.
Yeah.
So,
that's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that perspective of, you may or may not need it ever, but at the same time, if you have it, it's almost like insurance. Like,
yeah.
You spend so much on insurance all the time, but when you actually need it, you're so glad that you had it. So this is like insurance. So just to kind of summarize, so keep a tenant journal so that you're basically documenting all of your interactions with people. So
especially now with this,
yeah,
you should be doing it before, but this just makes it so much more important. And
good idea.
Especially if you feel you're gonna have problems with somebody, that backup's gonna be so valuable.
Yeah, I love it. Because like in Ontario, for example, they're saying no evictions, and they're saying basically like there's no clear direction, just no evictions. That's it. So people are like, woohoo, we don't have to pay rent. There's so much left open that it's just really good to have that documentation. And then putting in, and if anyone needs that document from Barry McGuire, we'll be putting it in the Fearless group here if it's not already there. And so you'll have access to be able to download that form. So, having those two clear things, I think, is a really good idea. What about using questions? I think the biggest question we've gotten is, should we let our tenants use their damage deposit toward rent? Now, I know what my answer is, and I said that yesterday in our training. What is your answer? Should they be using last month's rent, depending what province you're in, or damage deposit for rent for April or May, for example?
Last month's rent might be a little bit different because the rules are different revolving that, but security deposits are clearly stated they're not rent. So security deposit is never, ever rent. It can be used to cover rent in the case where somebody's evicted or applied towards part of the rent, but you're leaving yourself wide open if you start using it. It's far more important to put some kind of payment plan or some kind of structure in place where maybe we defer 1 month, but we add it in for an extra month. We add an extra month onto the contract or whatever you can do to make it work. You never want to use it as rent. And we see this, or I see this, Alberta eviction again. My tenant is moving out at the end of the month. They said, just use my security deposit for rent. No, you need to pay the rent. Otherwise, any of the work that may be required, whether it's cleaning, etc., comes directly out of my pocket. So You need to pay the rent. Well, I'm not going to. Okay. Well, here's the process. I'm going to file at the RTDRS. I will win because you're not paying rent. It's very clear. It's very apparent. The rules are set out. I will win. You're going to have a judgment and it's going to show up on your credit report. Do you really want that? This could affect you getting anything from a car loan to a home loan to a new cell phone. Do you really want that on your credit report?
Yeah.
It's simple. We can work it out.
Okay, so, and that kind of leads us into our next conversation, which we talked about before we started recording, is like, there's the laws, there's the legislation, there's all this stuff that we can use, but I just keep on using Ontario as an example because it's pretty rough out there. I mean, they're looking at 4 or 5 months before they get this person out, if they do, as well as no clear direction. So no one really knows what is going to work and what's not. And like you said, it's liquidity, that everything's changing every day almost, or every week. So, what you think you did right may not apply. So at the end of the day, both you and I have said we feel that you have to work with your tenants more than working with your legislation, correct?
Yes. You have to fit it in that funnel of legislation, but your priority is making sure that your tenants are okay and that you're getting some money coming in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, like you mentioned it already, but like being really clear with things like, so this is what will happen. At the end of the day, you may not pay rent, blah, 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 but I will get that judgment against you eventually. You will have to move. And that will affect your credit. So that's one thing that is a good reminder for people. What other stuff do you have in your toolbox that you often say to tenants to remind them that you're on the same side and that you're working together? I have a couple buzz things that I usually say, but what else do you got there?
Well, now is a little bit different,
True.
but there is quite often where you have to fall back, and there was the old cash for keys routine. In a normal time, it's like, listen, things aren't working out. I would much rather have you move on and find another place. And, if that requires me getting your security deposit on the day you move out, so it can go immediately to your landlord, I'll even forego some of the rent for the month if that helps you get out quicker. What works to get you out? It's going to save me more money to have a bad tenant out than trying to go through the expense of evicting them and the time lost and then the extra time because they're not happy so they don't clean up the place. It's like, here's my deal. You leave on the 15th of the month, I'll refund you your full security deposit and your half of the month's rent if the place is clean, reasonably clean, and we'll just call it a split. We'll move on. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah.
Scenarios like that. Now, again, I have to overuse the word fluid. It's just changing so much. Are people going to be able to find new places? Are people going to even be able to leave if they've got no money? Where are they going to get security deposits? Where are they going to get rent? So here we come full circle back to, we got to make things work for these tenants because they're going to hold on. And I would see this with my rooming house tenants. When they were in dire straits, they had so few options. And even when you tried to help them, they were just shut down. And it's like, it's only going to get worse. You've got the drop-in center and you've got, this is your option to go to. So work with me. Let me try and help you to get through this. Let's see what we can do. And it's like, nope, you're going to have to evict me. You're going to have to do all this. It's like, I'll do it.
Yeah.
I know how. And it's not going to work out as good for you as you think. It might buy you another 2 or 3 weeks of time, but the repercussions will not be so good for you.
Yeah.
So some of it will come down to their mindset. And, ultimately, we still need to work with the tenants that we have right now. And we'll go full circle back to, if you put all that time and effort to get the good people in, work with them.
Yeah, for sure. It's absolutely worth it. It's not, like you've said before, tenants are a huge asset to us. So, and that turnover and that, even just the expense, we talk a lot about, like our company name is Investor Life. And the reason is because we believe that you have to have a life with investing. Otherwise you'll be out of the game within 4 or 5 years. Like a lot of investors come in and out. And you really haven't hit that kind of wealth point at that point. You've hit cash flow, you've gotten chunks of change, you've gotten, whatever here and there, you've done well, but you haven't actually changed your lifestyle as a result of real estate. And that's really what, the point is of getting in, is so that you can create a different life for yourself. So, we talk about that all the time, about how you have to, safeguard your lifestyle. And that's part of it. Less turnover, less stress with your tenants, making sure that they know that you're on their side. And I've said to I've said to one tenant, they paid just fine for April. We got all rents for April. No problems. We checked in with everyone ahead of time. How are you doing? Do you need anything? Not with rent related, just how are you doing? And, everyone paid on time. We helped them. 2 of them, we helped get some new, programs, going like back when no one knew what the benefits were going to be and all that. We were trying to help them. To this week, we've now helped. There's a new program out with the Métis Nation, offered some housing grants. So we let them know about it. 2 of them actually qualify for it. So we're kind of helping them through that. But, I've said to people, just so you know, it doesn't help if I can't pay the mortgage and I go into foreclosure. That doesn't help you. That doesn't help me. That doesn't help the economy. And I find that really reminding them that we're human too, and that we're hit hard, that our hours have been reduced at work. We've been laid off. We've got a sick family member that now we can't work, whatever it might be. Reminding them that we're not this big powerhouse landlord. We're human beings too, and this is affecting all of us. And this is, a time for us to be working together. So what works for you? I'm going to try and accommodate anything that I can for you. If I can do it, I will do it. What works for you? I'm putting the onus on them. So I don't know about what you did in your portfolio for getting all your rents and stuff in April and what you plan for May, but that has seemed to work for us and other investors, reminding them you're one of them.
It's a similar plan, and fortunately for me, all my tenants are still working or working more, and everything's looking good at the moment. But that could change on a dime.
Right.
So just know your numbers, know what you need, and be prepared to help as you can.
Right
and
on.
So you touched on some stuff last night that I want to just bounce back to. So the credit consent that we talked about last night. So people were wondering, I read through a bunch of the questions and information there. That's on your application form. But the other thing you need on there is emergency contacts as well.
Yes.
So, which is a great way to track these people down afterwards. So it's just little things like that. You need a really solid application.
Let's review exactly what we talked about, just for those that didn't see last night. So just to revamp. So last night we were supposed to do a training live with Bill. The technology was not working. Everything was glitching out. So we ended up, I just kind of covered a few things for our weekly Tuesday training. And then we said we will recircle with Bill today and we'll post this as a recording. So that's what you're watching right now. So there were some stuff that went in last night. Now, what Bill's referring to is, here's something that we're doing, what we've always done, but we're recommending to our investors and our clients to be prudent in, is that we have always required a credit check of our tenants. That's just what we require within our own portfolios. They have to have a credit check done in order to move into our places. So we're okay. We have the consent, legal consent from them to check their credit. Now, why is that helpful? Is that, let's say things don't go well for you with COVID and your tenants and things deteriorate to the point where you are going to lose them and maybe they owe you money when they leave. Now, how do you collect on that money if you don't know where they went? And that's a big problem. And I learned this tip from a collection guy, this random, he was so funny. He looked like a biker, and I don't even know. Anyways, he never did collect anything for us, but he had a lot of knowledge. But what he told me was, do you have credit check consents? And I said, yes. And he's like, every single one of your people that you are handing over the files for? And I said, yes. And he's like, perfect. Then I'll be able to find them and post judgments to them, like give them a judgment. So in most provinces that I know of anyways, you're going to have to be able to serve paperwork on them once they're gone. You have to be able to say, I got a court order, I got a judgment, I got this. Here's your copy of it. And if you can't serve that paperwork, then you can't get your judgment and you can't collect and you can't affect their credit. You can't do all these things. So last night, what we were talking about was, even right now, if you don't have that, this might be a good opportunity for you to say, listen, I'll work with you. Let's do a payment plan. You'll fill out the documentation that you're going to get from us. We'll have it posted here. And this payment plan, I'll figure it out. And I'll send over to you your credit check consent as well, just so that you can enter into our payment plan at this time. And making it just part of your process, what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to get consent to check their credit. So if things do go wrong later, you can find them again. Now, to that, you added in, after we spoke, after I was done the live part, and we talked briefly, you said, here's another really good way that you can find these people after. So, and that was brilliant, and I've used it too, but never thought about it. So what do you figure there?
This is back from my rooming house days. because a lot of the people I would deal with would be semi-transient, and I had emergency contacts on my applications for rooming house people, and I actually had a spiel that I would use all the time, and it would be simply something along the lines of, so you come home from work, it's really late, you trip, you fall down the stairs. Who do I need to call to let you know what's happening? Give me an emergency contact. And it would be amazing how readily I would be able to get that information. Because it's like, well, okay, here, you got to call my mom, you got to call my dad, here's my ex-wife. So you'd have some information, and that became a valuable way to find out more about them later if they did skip out or if there was issues. So, and now, of course, it's also on my application form, emergency contacts.
Yeah, so. Same with us and our lease. Every year they have to refill out that portion of emergency contacts. And I have used it before where I've contacted, like, I'll never forget the one guy. I contacted his mom, and I was like, yeah, just looking to see if you know where he is. He's not answering my calls. He owes us rent. He's going to be evicted tomorrow. I thought I'd give him one last shot before we, went through, blah, blah, blah. And he called me within 3 minutes. So yeah, I mean, that it does work. So that's what you're saying, is by getting emergency contact or family information, not only will you be able to find them, but maybe have someone on your side to help them help themselves, correct?
Exactly. And just to stay on the credit check note, because I've got all my notes down here, I keep on looking down to see what I'm missing or haven't talked about yet. Yeah. One of the people on the feed last night was asking, if they should be doing credit checks now when it's harder to potentially find tenants. And you've always got to do them. I have a screening course I teach, and that's one of the things I talk about. You've always got to screen your tenants.
Nice.
As we're going through this COVID crisis, we're going to have a lot more people out there who are going to be the lower echelon of tenants. And when you're desperate for housing, you will lie, you will be deceitful, and you don't want them in your property because they're the ones who are going to cause you all the headache. It's kind of a numbers game as a landlord. And again, with the vast number of tenants I've had, the majority of tenants are great. You've got some that are just superb, just so fantastic, you can't believe it. But you also have a number on the other end, which are not so good. And those are the ones that will, push you to get out of being a landlord or push you to become, get a property manager. So the more screening you can do up front, the more work you can do up front to make sure you've got that right tenant, the more you've got to do, which involves that credit check, which brings us full circle back to you've done all this work. You've put all the effort in. Keep those good people.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. I often liken tenants to, like, it's like a teenager that, you want to be their friend, but you also have to be their parent. But if you let them run awry, it goes insane. You have to be strict. But if you also are this, like, get your thumb on them, they're going to go crazy too. So, it is that delicate balance of finding, being a good human, as we always talk about, and also, keeping your standards. So I love that whole idea of it. It's great. What do you figure? So doing credit checks no matter what. We agree. That's how we run our portfolio as well, especially now that you're in COVID. Yes?
And just to back up, just because you're getting this new information, if you're getting people to sign the credit check consent forms right now, doesn't mean you have to pull their credit check now. If they're already in place, it can impact their credit. I don't know how much of an issue it's going to be right now with all the other stuff going on. It could drastically impact them if they're not making other payments and they're trying to get you money. Right. So hold back from doing that credit check unless you absolutely need to do it. At the time of screening, yes, you want to do it at that point, and only on the selected applicant. You don't get 10 applicants and do 10 credit checks because they're going to cost you money. There's a couple of free services down in the US that are borderline. There's more services now that are anywhere from $15 to $35, depending on what you're looking for, even a little bit more if you get into criminal record checks, etc. So.
And you know what? I don't know about you, but we often do. We do pay the extra to have a soft check, what it's called, so that our check is not a hard check. It won't impact their credit, but you have to pay more for that as a landlord. But I do tell people that so that they know, like, yes, we do a credit check, but just so you know, we pay the extra so that you get a soft check so it doesn't impact your credit negatively, unless, of course, you end up owing us money, and then it would. So yeah, we always kind of throw that part in there, right?
Awesome.
Okay, so what about vacancies now? What do you figure we do with our vacancies now? How are you, proceeding with showings or not showings?
Well, I'm fortunate. I don't have to do any right now.
Yeah.
But this is going to be one of those situations where it's going to be case by case. We're seeing this with the sale markets where people are doing video recordings of the properties so they don't have to walk people through. They're doing FaceTime walkthroughs with potential applicants just so they can see the property. If you can do a recording, I mean, this is a funny thing. And this is more of the strategies that are pretty well universal. When we started, we would get somebody calling to look at a place and we would drop everything and rush over to the property, show the property. And then they would go, yeah, it's not really what I'm looking for. And now you've spent, in a bigger city, 30-minute drive there, 15-minute walk through, 30-minute drive home. This is kind of self-defeating. I've lost another hour and a half of my life. But we do it again the next night.
Right? And then you start investing real estate.
Yeah. So you do this multiple times and it's like, what a waste of time. And then you start going, all right, well, let's look at it a little bit different. I will have an open house on Saturday from 1 to 3. So, you start compiling names and it's like, okay, we're going to do this from 1 to 3. So I'm going to book you in at 1 o'clock. I'm going to book you in at 1:15, 1:30, 1:40. So you get all these people lined up. Now suddenly you've got 5 or 6 or 12 or, depending on the era, 30 people showing up in a 2 to 3 hour time span. You're getting it all done at once. You also have a little psychology working there because now they see other people there and it's like, oh, this is a, high demand property. So it works in your favor.
It does.
That was before. Now people don't want to be around people.
Yeah.
I've been out twice in the last 3 weeks and it's just kind of eerie out there because people are getting out of your way.
No.
And they used to get out of my way because I just looked grumpy because I was out, but now they're getting out of the way for different reasons. So, we got to fall back to, video recordings potentially of the place and FaceTimes of the place. So again, you could set up something where you go to the property and you have 2 or 3 people lined up and you walk them through and you narrow it down to get the people that are closer to your property. You're going to have to follow some safety protocols about wiping down switches and everything. If you've got tenants in place, it gets even more complicated because they're leaving at the end of the month, but you want to show it, but can you, should you, what are the implications? You don't want to drag people that may potentially be sick into your tenant with the 2 kids. And I don't have specific answers because it is case by case and you've got to kind of walk through these different situations. One tip that I tell a lot of landlords is if you've got great tenants in place, ask if you can get pictures of the property because their furniture looks so nice and they've decorated it so nice and it looks so good. Get those pictures, get consent from them that you can use those pictures in your advertising later so they don't come back and say, hey, you can't show that. Do stuff like that. So that makes your potential marketing easier because you can go, hey, this is what the property looks like when it's all configured, when it's all set up. I can't actually show it to you yet because the tenants aren't out, but now you have an idea. Is this something that's going to work? Is this something that would be, fit your needs?
Yeah.
Get them narrowed down before you just go wasting your time going and hang out at a property for somebody to maybe or maybe not show up.
Yeah. Love it. That's awesome.
So I didn't really answer you, but
no,
I get the idea.
Overall, though, you did. I did hear a podcast thing where the guy said, leave them empty. Actually, no, it was a girl. She said, leave your properties empty right now. And I was like, what? No, like that as a landlord and as no, you're not leaving. So you answered my question in that we're getting a lot of people saying, so do I just leave my property empty for a while then? Or what do I do? Do I start doing showings? Yes, your answer is, and my answer is, yes, you still try to fill it. Will you fill it as quick? Maybe, maybe not. Do you have to change your methods? Sure. But do you leave it empty by choice at this point? No, you do not leave it empty, correct?
Yeah. And, this segues us off to a couple of different topics here as well. It's going to be so much more important to screen your tenants, because we don't know who's going to be out there and how bad they are.
Yeah.
And the repercussions of this is there's going to be a lot of landlords who simply aren't prepared for this and are going to lose their properties. My feelings, and I may be proven wrong, but my feelings are it's going to put a real damper on the rental market. We're going to lose a lot of inventory. And when that happens, there's going to be more demand, less supply. And while we may see the value of properties come down because there's going to be more foreclosures and everything, we're going to see rents going up because of shortages. So it's really interesting times, and
Right.
there is no final answer as to what it's going to look like until we get to that time when we see these things happening. But supply and demand, when there's shortages, prices go up. Look at toilet paper.
Craziness, right?
Yeah.
And you too, though, you've been investing since 2003. We're 2004, so 17-ish years here. You've seen, and you've been in a volatile market as well. You've been in an oil gas kind of centered economy. We've gone up to $150 a barrel. We're now down at $3 a barrel. We've seen ups and downs, recessions. This will be the fifth recession that I can feel. Like, there's been others where they've said we've kind of gone up and down. I haven't felt them. This one will be our fifth. You've seen it happen. You understand, you can see the patterns. This is your take on what will probably end up happening. So as a takeaway for us as investors, we can either be ready for it, and have our foundation set so that we are able to take advantage of opportunities that come our way, able to help out the people that we can to keep our portfolios nice and stable and, no turnover, and keep our tenants happy. And like, we can take that high road, or we can be the ones that dig in our heels and say, this is fine, or, live in a bubble and say, this is going to be fantastic. And at the end of the day, we're not going to be the ones left standing.
Yeah.
You've seen it.
Yeah. It's, the crazy days where property values were going up $10,000 in a month, and you'd put an ad up and you'd have 900 views of your ad and 200 phone calls in a couple of days, to the extreme opposite, where you'd put an ad up and you'd hope you'd get a phone call in a week, and values were dropping and rents were going down, and you had to get more creative and create better properties and stand out from the crowd. And you had to outmarket people before versus just putting a sign up,
right,
in the old days.
And we might have to get back to that. We might also start to be able to really see a lot of the opportunities that are going to come with people being willing to do like vendor takebacks on the sales of their homes. And right, like, didn't we see a ton of that?
That's going to be huge. I mean, people will want to escape from their properties.
Yeah.
And some people will pay to escape, and others will take losses to escape. And I don't want to be doom and gloom on the value side, but I think it's realistically we could see a 20, even 25% drop in values. Whether that's going to be a short-term issue or a long-term issue, we're not even sure how long COVID's going to be around. They're saying we could be in the self-isolation type scenario till June or July or August, and until we get solid answers, it's all speculation, which makes it all very dangerous.
Yeah, right. Speculation for sure. Yeah. And as much as we don't know what's going to happen, we have seen kind of the signs and seen things that can come. And so it's our time as investors to, either make a choice here. Like, we can put our head in the sand and say, oh no, this isn't happening. And, we don't want to deal with it and not want to get in touch with our tenants. I had one client didn't want to get in touch with his tenant because he's kind of a difficult guy. And I can just imagine if I reach out to him, he's going to be like, and I said, well, our recommendation is that you get ahead of it, blah, blah, blah. So he did. He reached out and said, hey, if you're, self-isolated, I can pick up groceries for you, or, if you need medicine or anything like that, let me know. I can go do that kind of stuff for you, just checking in on you. And I guess the guy called him and was like, wow, like, I can't believe you thought of us and you cared for us in this time. And I'm okay. I'm working from home. But I just can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And
Huge.
Yeah. Especially because they don't have a lot of family here. So, to know that you have someone on your side right now. But you can't put your head in the sand. You can't.
And I was seeing that in some of the landlord groups. It's like, April 1st. I still don't know if my tenant's going to pay today. Well, have you reached out to them? Well, no, I'm just hoping they're going to pay. No, get ahead of this. Talk to them. Make sure that, that you understand and they understand that you're working together.
Yeah.
Don't be one of them landlords. Be somebody that your tenant goes, oh, you wouldn't believe what a great landlord I have.
Right.
When you get comments and emails from your tenants saying, what an awesome landlord you are, you just feel so good versus the other ones.
Yeah, but that's a nice part about what's coming, I think, too, is that we have the opportunity here to, show what we are made of as people, provide what we can, pass on any, benefits that we receive, pass them on to them, and we will not. Like I have a tenant that I had, oh my goodness, I had him for maybe 8 or 9 years, and I don't know how many times I helped him out. Dropped off diapers to his house because I knew that they didn't have money for rent. I knew that they'd given me everything that they had for their rent, and I was like, they need formula, they need diapers. They kept having babies, and I had him for years. He ended up leaving without paying me last month's rent, and damage deposit was all gone for like cleaning and stuff. He contacted me 3 years later and just apologized and said, I just wanted to say I'm really sorry for doing that. You didn't deserve that. I was in a bad place, and I've thought about you ever since. Like that kind of stuff it comes back to. It's like, you know what? I got that place rented out. A neighbor took it like within days while they saw us cleaning it out. Like, it wasn't a big deal, but I had the shot to go and wreck his credit and call his boss and do this. And you know what? I just knew he was in a rough place, and I thought he was good for a number of years. I'm just going to walk from it. And that comes back, right?
Yeah. And that plays out sometimes. You can try to track down these tenants that mess with you, but you're just wasting negative energy.
Thank you.
And it can be so hard to collect. If they've got no money, they're not going to be able to give you any money, and you've spent all this negative energy tracking them down, figuring out where they are, serving them notices, and you still don't get paid.
Right.
So you got to figure out what your time and energy and happiness is worth. So do you spend 10 hours doing all this knowing you're never going to get paid anyway? On the other end of the spectrum, I did have a tenant that I evicted way back in 2007. Through one of the eviction service companies. I wanted to learn how that works, so I used an eviction service company to do the eviction. And he came back, I think it was about 3 years later, and said, you put in a legal judgment on my credit. I'm trying to get a car. I've talked to my lawyer, and if you don't get that taken off, I'm going to sue you. And which I countered. It's like, that's great. I really appreciate you getting back to me. The eviction was not illegal. The judgment is not illegal. Please try and sue me because I'd like your new address to come after you for more damages. He went silent, and it was a couple months later he came back to me and said, how much do I owe you? I need to pay this off to get the judgment off. It's like,
yeah.
So knowing how to deal with the circumstances, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay, so we do actually have a couple questions specifically submitted for you, so maybe we can run through those for a second, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so Susan asks, for leases that are coming up soon, how long should we renew for? 3 or 4 months or a year? This is with tenants who have paid so far, but it will be a wait and see with all tenants. So what's your opinion on how long to renew right now?
This is one of those case-by-case scenarios.
Yeah,
so
it is.
As we talked about, I'm expecting rents to go up. They may not, but I believe that we're going to see a little bit more pressure on the market. Now, because there's going to be a ton of unemployment, they're talking about, will we see more people leave the area? That may affect whether there will be rent increases, but my feeling is we're going to see some rent increases just because of shortage of supply. If you commit to a year lease, you won't be able to raise any rents. If you commit to 6 months, that gives you the option to potentially raise rents if you want to. It doesn't mean you have to. You want to be fairly competitive with what's going on out there. And you want to be fair to your tenants. This might not be over in 6 months. We don't know.
Right?
So 6 months would probably give you more flexibility. If you've been renewing with your tenants for a year all the time, and everything's working out fine, probably just stick with a year. But again, case by case, what's going to work for you, what's going to work for your tenants, what's going to keep everything happy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Knowing that rents probably aren't going down, even if you're making cash flow off your property and you're locked in for another year, and rents are going up another $50 or $100 a month. Big scheme of things, you've got the tenants you want, you've got the tenants that are working with you. If you're out $50 or $100 over a year, it's not that bad a scenario.
Yeah, yeah, and I tend to agree with you in that, even right now, seeing that it's May, and I know that Susan is in Edmonton, or I think Susan's in Edmonton. So going into a 6-month lease is going to take you to right before winter. There's less people moving at that time too. We don't know if COVID's going to be done and over. All of those scenarios too. So this time of year.
Are people going to be so sick of living in the same place and not going outside for 6 months if they're going to want to move just to see a new place? We don't know.
What's interesting about that, I saw that we had a question come in and they said, my tenants are already talking about, she said, my tenants are already talking about the fact that all they have is the balcony and they really want some green space seeing as they're stuck inside. And I thought that's an interesting thought for those like apartment condo type places,
I'm
right?
so sick of being stuck in my 3-room condo.
Right.
I am getting a house and house prices shoot up like crazy. We don't know.
We don't know. Yeah. No, but what is interesting is that we've been through this enough times to start seeing some of the signs. And so not that you're right or wrong, but that you can start to feel, things that happen. And I do agree that I think that we're going to see a tightening in the market. So yeah, anyways, yeah. Okay. So great. That's great. Hopefully that answered your question, Susan. Terry says she's out in Nanaimo. Terry says, so far my tenants have been great and have paid rent, but they're uncertain about the future. I provided them with helpful links to government programs. They were very grateful. What if they want to defer payments? Then they move out when their lease is up. That's the other consideration with doing a 1-year long or 6-month long lease, right? Is that adding on and incrementing. But let me finish the question. ADD, squirrel. What if they want to defer payments? Then they move out when their lease is up in June without paying. How would you recommend handling this scenario?
We're treading in new waters here. I think we are going to take a hit as landlords on this. I don't think there's any way that it's going to work around this. Technically, under the rules, when tenants enter into a lease for a year and they leave the lease early, you have some options like lease breaking fees. Again, depending on your local legislation, some are applicable, some are not. But you really don't have a lot of recourse. Theoretically, they're responsible for the lease for the remainder of the term. The onus is on the landlord to fill that vacancy. So if you don't rent it for 4 months, by paper, the tenant's supposed to cover you for those 4 months. In reality, you'll never get that money.
Yeah, especially right now, right? No judge is going to say, oh yeah, okay, you had to move. And yeah.
Yeah, so you need to work with the tenants. And if the deferral buys you another 4 months of getting most of the rent or enough rent to make everything work for you, it works for me. If the deferral doesn't work, then it's not going to work at all. So you got to come up with another plan. Are there alternative ways for them to get funding? Maybe you need to make arrangements for them just to move on so you can try and find tenants that can work with you. Case by case. Here's the thing. So many landlords took bad tenants because they just wanted to fill their properties. Now their bad tenants have got leverage on them. And if they're bad tenants to begin with, you short fell to begin with by not putting the right people in there. And now you're going to pay for it even more.
Yeah.
So if you have a way to get out of that, you might need to take advantage of it at this point and go, listen, you know what, I can't really do that. So let's see what we can do about helping you move on. We'll get your security deposit back. We'll get you a full month's rent back because, as long as you leave before the start of the next month, we won't worry about that. We'll make it all work. We'll get you out of here. And now you're stuck back in that full circle where you have to figure out how to show and how to rent out your place.
Yeah.
And if people are going nuts because they don't have they're just living on a balcony and in the 2 or 3 rooms in their apartment and you've got a house, you may have some viability there, but.
Yeah.
who can move and how can they move and how can they get their 10 friends together and social distance, and so many new challenges.
It's so true. Actually, I never thought of that. How do you move when you just got to do it all by yourself? I
Yeah.
mean, you can, but that would be a heck of a lot more work.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to reread the very ending of this question. And I know Terry, she's one of our Ignited members. She's a very fair, very calculated, but very fair and kind landlord. So I have no doubt that she's treating them, really wonderful and doing what she can. Interestingly, I find it interesting, really good question, because my parents have a lease that's going to be coming up where I think we're going to have to offer eventually, not right now, probably not even for May, but maybe for June, a deferral program. So where we say, okay, you can pay, $800 a month right now for, say, June's rent. And then come September, we're going to tack on that extra and divide it by the remaining months in the lease. And Terry says, what if they want to defer payments, then they move out when their lease is up in June without paying the extra deferred amount, I think is what she's saying. How would you recommend handling it? So I know for us, what we're thinking is if they want to defer payments and they have a short fixed term lease like end date, I think we're going to ask them to re-sign at that time for a longer lease in order to qualify for the payment plan. What do you think of that, Bill? Like, is that going to work legislatively? And I haven't thought about it or looked into it enough, but.
Here we come full circle. Even if you sign them up for a year or 18 months or 2 years to try and run that over, now you're running into a problem because you've locked yourself into that rent. And what if rents go up? That's
right.
One consideration.
Yeah.
What if they decide after 3 months that they've been in that place for so long and they're just so excited to move on, or they've lost their job, or they divorced because they didn't realize that having to live with their spouse for such close quarters for 3 months was going to drive them insane.
Right.
You're not going to be able to collect on the next, 8 months, 12 months, 14 months, whatever you've tried to sign them for these extended leases. The bright side is if you're renting a house out for $1,600 a month and they move out, in 4 months you might be able to rent it out for $2,000 because the whole market's changed. Or it might be the same price, or it might even be a little bit less because we don't really know. We're anticipating that rents are going to go up, but we don't know.
Yeah.
So I think we have to quit dwelling on the what ifs and focus on more. This is what we're going to do to help you. This is what we're going to do to get through. I have to jump on the deferral on this property because I'm unsure about what's going on. So, I'm going to make sure you're covered off. You're going to pay the $800 instead of the $1,600 because that's what you can afford. I'm going to get the deferral, and I know I'm going to get tacked on. So I'm okay. I'm not losing money. And I'm just going to build up my war chest for the next 3 months because I'm going to stack that money that you're putting to cover off these payments that I'm going to have later when I'm probably going to be vacant.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
what do you do, right?
Yeah. That toilet's going to get clogged at 2 a.m. and I'm going to get a call. What if, right? It hasn't happened.
It doesn't happen.
17 years.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, and rooming house tenants, like that's when I have a house, I've got one tenant in that house. When you have a house, you have 5, 7, whatever it might be. Like that's a lot more tenants, a lot more work, a lot more people.
Yeah.
So hats off to you.
Yeah. I have lots of bad stories, but I have lots of great stories too. So.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Awesome. That's perfect. Well, thank you for all your tips and your experience. And I think a good word for that, like you said, was nuances. And because there's all these little things and you have to figure out case by case. So one thing, is awesome is lots of times we don't know who to use as a sounding board because we're going to get, all kinds of advice. For example, that one podcast where the girl said, just leave your places empty right now. Take your deferrals and leave them empty. That's terrible advice if you ask me, but so you have consults that you can do if people need like one-on-one stuff. You've got a ton of resources on your website, the Educated Landlord, like tons of info on there. You must have spent hundreds of hours. Yes.
A couple hours, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So
So theeducatedlandlord.com. Thanks for spending your time with us. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of summarize just a couple things real quick. Tenant journal for documentation. So if you've tried and it's gone well or not well, either way, you want a tenant journal for documentation. Then put your payment plan. The document, again, is available here in Fearless for getting that payment plan in place from Bear McGuire. Emergency contacts, huge, so that you can find them later. So that was a great tip. Totally have used it, but forgot, would never have mentioned it. So thank you for that. And weigh things case by case, but remember that ideally, at the end of the day, these tenants are our asset. We are nothing without them. We need them. So work with them the best that you can. Yes?
that sounds great. And
Any
know your numbers. Understand what your payments are on some of these properties right now, in case you are finding yourself short or you have to make any kind of agreements with tenants. If your monthly costs right now because of a deferral are only $250 to $300, that gives you a ton of leeway to work with a tenant who's paying $1,500. Maybe you drop it down to $750 for a couple of months. Maybe you take a little bit of a hit on it, knowing that you're going to retain the tenant, that you're going to have good people. It's nuances. It's case by case. Figure out what's going to work. Figure out what's going to keep you afloat, keep your tenants afloat, and allow you to move forward.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome stuff. Thank you for being here for landlords all over the place, like everywhere, always.
And thank you guys for what you guys do. I mean, I've been following along with you guys for ages, and I remember my wife and I meeting you initially at that rain event in Calgary. It must have been about 2004, sitting at a table, this cute young couple that were all excited about real estate, and look where you've gone.
And what's crazy about that, I think we determined that was our very first like paid event that we had committed to. So we had driven down 3 hours to Calgary. We stayed in this hotel. We didn't have a lot of money, so we're spending a lot of money to be there and do this. And we get there and there's 300 people in the room and everyone knows each other, but we don't know anybody, and everyone's doing stuff, and we're the ones that are surely to fail. Surely we're going to be the ones that can't make it happen, but then you meet people like you that just give you that little encouragement along the way, like, no, it's real, you can believe this, it's good. And so yeah, it's crazy where your journeys take you. And then not a lot of people are standing 17 years later, Bill. Not a lot.
There's been a lot of people who've disappeared.
A ton, yeah. It says a lot for what you've done and how you've treated people along the way. I think that's key indicator when you can look at someone and see how long they've been standing, and that tells you how they've treated all of their relationships, business wise, tenant wise, everything. So yeah, thanks for being a good example, because it's important.
Awesome. And thanks again for having me.
Okay, have a good one. Thanks again.
Bye.